My faith tradition has given me many gifts, and one of the gifts it has given me is my relationship with death. Now, you might not think that this is a particularly useful gift or one that anyone would want, but it was for me a very precious gift. Because when I was a child and growing up in the world, my parents believed that it was time to be done with the superstitions of religion and all their trappings. And so we did not participate in any kind of community. And as a result, we were often alone when we were shaken by the worst things that can happen in life. Now, my father found solace after his childhood internment during the World War. He found solace in the world of facts and figures. He was a scientist to his very core, and he believed that when someone died, there was no sensible thing that you could do that would be of use. And so there was only one thing he taught us to do, which was to step away. When someone that we loved would become ill, even if it was someone who had been very important in our life, we would just start stepping back from that person, breaking off relationship, as if somehow that would make it easier to hold that death. His intention was very good. He meant to try to spare us harm. And what it meant, though, was that when I was 22, I had an unusual experience. My next-door neighbor died, and while he was a wonderful man who I had had some pleasant evenings with, he wasn't someone that I knew particularly well. But his wife invited me to come to the memorial service, and I did. It was the first memorial service I had ever attended in my life, and the first time that any grief or loss had ever been acknowledged, any death. So the service began with some music, and I began to cry. And then the preacher said a few words, and I began to sob. And then there was more music, and by then I was trying to use the sleeve of my shirt very unobtrusively. As the service went on, people turned to me and patted me on the head and hand. They came over and embraced me because I was dissolving in a puddle of tears before them, mourning every loss I had had in my life up to that point, for which I had been given no tools. At the end of the service, we filed out. I had gone out a little early, and people came up to me saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry that you lost your grandfather." I just didn't take the time to explain to them that actually our relationship was much different because I was too busy engaging with that whole chain of grief and loss for which I had had no outlet up till then. A couple years later, I found my faith home in Unitarian Universalism, and one of the things I found was the redemptive bond of community. And what I learned was within that community, we hold together those things that we cannot hold alone. For me, All Souls, this celebration is one of our most holy days of the year, because we honor with other religions and cultures that need to have a cherished time when we hold close those whom death has taken and torn asunder from us. It's a time to acknowledge the ways that that veil is so thin, the ways that their spirit and energies remain in our lives at this time, to acknowledge that they are a part of us and a part of our lives, and that death does not change that. We, who sometimes take refuge in the importance of the rational and the knowable, are often stunned by the unknowable and unmanageable aspects of death and loss. And it's important for us as a community to hold this and to have ritualized ways that we recognize and create space. All Souls and All Saints Days are days to enter into dialogue with our dead, a day to offer prayers to them and to feel, as Dennis said, somehow, at some level, as if they're still actively involved in hoping the best for us. This is the time in the year at the end of the traditional seasons of harvest and work that there's that little space to reflect on the things that we haven't had time to reflect on. And in that space, cultures have always inserted this time to engage in thankfulness to those who came before us. It's the time of the year when we wrestle with our fears about death and when we're invited to look into that relationship and not to walk away from it, as I was taught as a child. We know very little about death, about what it brings except for our side of the occasion. But one of the great honors I have had as a minister is to sit with many people when they're on that moment of leaving this life. I've also done that with members of my own family. And what I know is that our engagement with these issues before we die helps us engage with them as we die. There is a doctor who works for hospice, and he tells the story of how he, as a young doctor, was talking with a nurse, gossiping about a patient. And he said, that woman in that room, she believes she's communing with her long-lost parents. Isn't that ridiculous? And the nurse turned to him and said, son, there are a lot of things they didn't teach you in medical school that you are going to learn. And he did. He learned well. He went on to start a project where he films people in their last days. And many, many, many of them talk about that sense of joy and elation that they get from feeling as if they have contact with those that have gone before them, even those that they did not have good relationships with in this life. They feel a sense of connection and a sense of peace. And while we may someday, I truly believe, as the child of my father, understand that there is some biochemical explanation for a sense of well-being that we may have programmed into us as we die, I think it's also important for us to recognize that we sense in those moments our need for continuation. The observance of All Souls Day allows us to remember that we are ever caught in that tussle between finite time and the infinity of life. The loss of one of our beloveds throws us into that excruciating place of unknowing and disbelief. And we need markers throughout those first years after such a time to mark our status as mourners. Our busy days need us to remember when otherwise we might forget. There are so many that we remember. We hold them in our hearts. And in every life, it has been my experience, on that cusp of leaving this life, there are some dreams and aspirations that remain undone. It is in gatherings like this, in the container of community, in the grief groups that we have, in the conversations that we have, that we remember that we are the ones who carry forward those dreams, who offer the counter to those mistakes, who hold the only form of immortality that we can know, because always, in our hearts and in our lives, we remember them.